Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Life's Black Belts. As always, I'm your host, Eric Alders, and I'm looking forward to bringing on another special guest for you guys to meet today. As always, it's a pleasure to try to bring some positive content to you all by introducing you to some mentors and life leaders from a variety of backgrounds and expertises in the world. And we'd like to go a bit further and learn more about how they developed the mindset and philosophy and what brought them to where they are today. And what I wanted to do, just first of all, is do a brief introduction on my guest today. My Life's Black Belt guest today is Mr. Kenny Weiss. He's the author of Your Journey to Success, How to Accept the Answers you Discover Along the Way. He is also a podcast host. He's the founder of the Greatness Movement. He is a life coach and public speaker as well. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next Life's Black Belt, Mr. Kenny Weiss. How are you, sir?
Doing really well, Eric. Thanks again for having me. I appreciate it.
Very good, sir. I appreciate you taking out the time to join us today. I'm really interested in getting into your story and what led you to be a life coach. As I was talking to you a little bit earlier, as a martial arts instructor, and there's a very small role that I also play one-on-one with some, children and adults to try to do my best to mentor them and coach them through life in addition to the skill sets they seek by, joining my school. So I'm always curious to learn what makes you and others want to also participate in helping those around us. A lot of people in this world sometimes are very selfish and into their own needs, which is fine. We could definitely be out there for ourselves. But when you take it a step further and you try to help those around you, I think is a very noble cause. And I would look forward to getting into what brought you to that point today. Let's start off a little bit by giving the audience a bit background on yourself, sir. So I believe I'm speaking to you now from, you're in Arizona. I'm in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Is that where you've been your whole life, or is that somewhere you settled later on?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Denver and moved here 4 years ago. I mean, I used to play pro hockey and pro golf, so I kind of lived everywhere, but Denver was always home base. But now I think, 4 years ago, I moved here full time. I never want to see snow again. I'm done with cold. So that's a big piece of what brought me here.
Okay. So you grew up in Denver, and about what point did you transition over? Was that as a young child, or that was as you were a little bit older in life?
Older. Yeah. I spent all my life there and then moved here full time 4 years ago.
Okay. So relatively new to the area then.
Yeah.
And then growing up in Denver, what was that life like for you a little bit? Do you come from a small family, large family, mother, father in the household? What was your childhood like?
Well, my parents were 16 and 18 when they got married.
Wow, that's young.
Yeah. 4 kids by 21 and 23. So I had, kids raising kids. Our house was chaos. Everyone was athletes and, with everyone so close in age too. Our parents, they were still children, raising us. So, and like I like to say, none of us are taught how to be a parent. We learn from people who weren't taught either. I'll tell a story in a speech where, I'll ask somebody, let me cut your hair. And of course they're like, well, do you have any experience? I'm like, well, I'm 52 now. I've watched people for 40 some years. And they're like, but have you taken a class? Or I'm like, well, no. And I'm like, well, why won't you let me cut your hair? And they're like, well, you don't have any experience. You haven't been taught. And as I'll say, I'm like, I find it fascinating that our hair, something that no matter how badly we treat it, will grow back perfectly on its own. We expect someone to take a class, and even the government requires a license. But to be a parent, not a single one of us learns a single thing. And we learn from people who basically grew up in the barber chair watching somebody else do it, and we think that's enough. And it's not to denigrate parents. It's not to say we're bad, but we just have a societal makeup that says we shouldn't learn about ourselves. We shouldn't develop ourselves emotionally. If anything goes wrong, we should hide it and stuff it and not deal with it. Well, if any part of your life isn't working, that's why. And so that's really where the greatness movement, the whole mission is to make a change in that. It should be our first response to, develop ourselves emotionally and grow as a person. And right now people will hire us or not hire us. They'll spend money on their cable TV, but they won't spend money to grow themselves. And that to me is, criminal. It's sad. And the societal belief that that's money not well spent, or it's not an investment in ourselves. To be the best we can be isn't a good investment. And there's just a societal dynamic in place. And so I'd like to break that barrier down, because that's why people are struggling.
Yeah, well, I think that dynamic also comes from our education system a little bit, because you're not necessarily taught about psychology, how to debate, how to understand, how to communicate with the opposite sex, all the things that actually you would require as an adult to truly function, regardless of the skill set or the career path that you follow. I really wish the education system focused more on providing us all fundamental life skills that we need to make us productive human beings, to have good character, to have good morals, good work ethics, and then later in life take on some sort of a trade. And your point on the license with parents, it's funny. I've actually had that exact conversation with people, and it brings up a debate of, what are you supposed to do? Take a test, or who's in charge of deciding if you get to be a parent or not? That's way too much control. So, I get that, but you often will hear people that, anyone could be a dad, anyone could be a mom, but it takes a real woman or a real man to be a father, or to be a mother, to really care. And with your parents so young, what was that? Did you ever notice that your parents were young growing up? Because I feel like all kids really have no true idea of age. I ask my students sometimes, how old am I? And they're like 72 or 18. And they have no concept. So at what point did you realize that your parents were younger than the average parent that maybe your friends in the neighborhood had?
That's not something until you get life experience. I mean, it was my 30s or 40s when I realized, like you said, you're too young. The consequence of that, my mom became an alcoholic, and she probably should have been a crack addict. I mean, to be that young with 4 kids, and since we don't teach any of these life skills, no wonder she turned to alcohol. And then my dad, he was beat to death as a kid. He never hit us, but he was filled with rage. So again, like you said, I'm not advocating the government step in and mandate, parenting classes or things like that. I think it's a personal responsibility we have to take on, and it's a belief system we have to change. But my parents, they never meant to be malicious, but let's face it, if you don't have the skills and tools, you're going to make a ton of mistakes. And even whatever your career is, look at pro athletes. Tom Brady, how many interceptions did he throw the last weekend? I didn't pay attention, but he made some mistakes, and he's one of the most gifted athletes in the world. Well, even as a parent with education and understanding, you're going to make mistakes. So I'm not saying we'll mitigate that, but the bias against looking at ourselves, that is the piece we all can play a part in and make a choice. So that's more what I'm advocating.
Now, in the 4 of you guys, siblings, where was your placement? Were the older, middle, youngest?
I was the third. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And growing up in that atmosphere with a little bit of the alcoholism and the anger inside the household, is that something that brought your siblings a little closer together in those moments?
No, it was pure chaos. We all reacted to it differently. The abandonment that causes, the anger, the disconnect, all the different things. And then, in my case, I basically became a surrogate spouse for both my parents emotionally. So everyone reacted differently. What became a sentinel moment for me, how I discovered it, was I was 10 years old, woke up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, opened the door, and there's my mom passed out naked on the toilet. That was when I discovered it. The other brothers and sisters, their experience was different. Their reaction to it was different. We all respond to trauma differently. And, and it's like I talk about in my book. I don't care what's going on in your business or personal life. It all stems back to your trauma. Like I talk about in my book, I know by your career what your trauma was in childhood. That's why you picked your career, why you picked your spouse. Every single choice you ever make in life is based on the trauma you went through. And usually what we're doing is using that trauma back against us. And that's why people are miserable. I talk about what I call the worst day cycle. And no one's taught us how to move out of that. And that's really what my book is one, to show you, look, your life is the way it is because of this, and here's the pathway out.
Wow. I mean, talking about how you all react differently, it's another reason why I like to go through a little bit of this before we get deeper into, what you're doing now, because I feel like there's a lot of people that are out there that feel like they're the only ones that have an abusive parent or have an alcoholic in the household. And, a lot of the social media world that we live in is filled with, beautiful photos and great quotes. And it's very rare that you find people that are truly honest about what's going on in their lives, and they have their Facebook profile that represents them. But we all know that it's not always the case of what goes behind closed doors. And often if people don't communicate and share that, they feel isolated and they feel alone. Did this impact you? And I mean, obviously you're the one that's on the show interviewing. What was the impact for you, through school? I know you said you got into athletics. Is that something you picked up to keep your mind busy, or how did this specifically impact you as a child?
Well, the impact of all of this is I became an alcoholic myself, a sex addict, spending addict, sugar addict, tobacco addict, love addict. I went through 2 horrific divorces, a child custody battle, a bankruptcy. I played 2 pro sports that I now see I never wanted to play. And then I contemplated suicide. And listen to every athlete talk when they say why they play, and they'll describe it by a feeling, the way it makes them feel. What that tells you is the trauma they went through as a child and how they're trying to reconcile it. They're repeating that feeling. So like, I even have a newspaper article in my office from 30 some years ago. My older brother played professionally too. And the title says something like ice proficiency or sibling rivalry led to ice proficiency for siblings, something like that. Well, the first 2 paragraphs talk about how as a kid, my older brother, because he was bigger and there was nothing I could do and he'd beat me up all the time, he'd shoot frozen tennis balls at my head. We'd play street hockey and he'd say, get in the net. And so I realized really quickly the only way I could ever beat up my brother or get back at him was by stopping him. So the only reason I ever became a professional hockey player and a goalie was to get back at my older brother. And there were a couple other reasons having to do with my dad. And so everybody does this. Every single athlete, listen to the trauma. They'll describe the trauma they went through, and that's why they're playing. Whatever somebody's career is, a financial advisor, there were money issues at home. And so whether they had too much or not enough, but that's what we're all doing. And so I only played sports, to get my dad's attention, and 2, to try and get back at my brother. I thought I loved them. Like literally, they were my passion. But once you learn how this dynamic works in our lives, you find who the core person you were really meant to be before the trauma. And that's what none of us know. You brought up, people think they're alone. There isn't a single person on this planet who is not in tremendous pain. And I'm not exaggerating. I can sit with anyone, and in 2 to 3 questions, I can show you immediately how much pain they're in, where it comes from. And most people, because of the lack of information, are completely oblivious. They're in the 4th stage of the cycle, I call it denial. They're not even aware of it. And that breaks my heart. That we don't, like you said, schooling, we don't have this basic information to know why we are the way we are and what to do about it.
Right. So, I mean, you mentioned your professional sports, and you mentioned in there hockey. Now, you said 2 professional sports. Was there an additional one? And the follow-up to that, so you were professional. Were you in the NHL, or were you in a minor league? Or can you give me just a little elaboration on your professional sports?
Yeah. I played hockey up into the IHL, just below the NHL. And
okay.
I could tell you this, the story of that, of why it stopped there. And then I played pro golf as well, but the golf, I didn't get very far. It was mini tour stuff. And by that point, as I see now, the reason I was pursuing it was to teach me the final stages of everything I wrote in the book. It was pure self-victimization and stuff like that. So I was much more successful at golf at a younger age. I could never translate it into tournaments because It was all trauma coming out. And that's why. And so like you hear about golfers in their 40s and 50s getting the yips. The reason they get the yips is a part of their brain is degraded and all that trauma they've never dealt with has come up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where all that stuff comes from.
Okay. So you also, after talking about the sports, you went down a litany of life struggles that you had went through, and you spit that out so quickly and so casually that I obviously know that you've come to terms with what you've been through, and you've discussed this before, and you're comfortable to talk about it. But
Sure.
you rattled off divorce and being addicted to almost everything I could possibly remember, from alcohol to sex to everything in between. Is it something that these tendencies that kicked in as a teenager, or as you got into professional sports and there was maybe popularity, recognition, money, whatever it may be? When did you, maybe you didn't notice it till you're older looking back on it, maybe you just thought you were having a freaking great time. But when did these behaviors really start kicking in where you noticed it?
Oh, early on in ninth grade, I started, well, as I see now, my first addiction was sugar. That was the first way I medicated. Like food, almost every obesity, diets are a waste of time. People stuff their face with food because of emotional trauma. It's the primary way we all deal with the emotions we've suffered and never conquered. So my first addiction was sugar. Then it became tobacco. Ninth grade, I started chewing tobacco. Then I discovered alcohol. Then I discovered sex. So all of these coping skills we use, booze, sex, drugs, pot, pills, all of them are our attempt to reconcile the feelings we went through in trauma or childhood or whatever. Now, most of them have become societally acceptable. Mm-hmm. But anyone who's overweight, they're in trauma. Anyone who's having drinks a couple times a week, like I said, that's alcoholism, but as a society we promote that's okay. Unless you're on the street, it's not alcoholism. But right. Everybody medicates nonstop every day. That's all we're ever doing because we've never been taught how to deal with our feelings. Most people don't even realize every single choice you ever make is based on your feelings, not your thoughts. Mm-hmm. That's why so many people in this business, they try and get you to change your thoughts. Well, for the most part, it's a waste of time. You have to change the way you feel, but nobody knows anything about feelings or where they come from. And so that's the biggest learning curve for people is, wait a minute, why did I reach for this or do this or pick this spouse or pick this career or pick this hobby? It's because of a feeling I'm going through. Most of them, because we lack the information, they're working against us. So that was my history. The other thing you have to realize is we have a society that rewards the victim. Think of it. If you're sick or hurt, if your life stinks, oh my God, everybody comes to your rescue. See, what happens in trauma is in that moment, we lose our authentic self. We are powerless. Our authentic power is taken from us. It happens to us. So that's what I talk about. The cycle is part of it. We then re-victimize ourselves because at least I chose it. It gives me power back. That's why we all choose to be the victim. Think of it. How do we celebrate anything in life? What do? Whether it's a sporting event, a wedding, a career achievement, we go destroy ourselves. We get drunk, we get stoned. We victimize ourselves. We don't even know how to live in the feeling of success or greatness. It's a societal dynamic. It's a human dynamic that I describe. And so I lay all of that out. And that's what happened to me. It's been passed down for centuries. It's nothing new. But the process that I talk about is new. It's groundbreaking as far as I've never seen anyone describe it the way I do. And it's every single person on this planet. It's how we all live our lives. Mm-hmm. And my book shows you how it's operating in your life.
Yeah, well, I think you're right that we're not really taught coping skills, and it's reached a level that's scary. I have 12-year-old twin girls, and there's things that we all had to go through growing up, but the one thing we didn't have is 24/7 social media. The world is a little bit different. I mean, it was different for us compared to our parents, of course. But you don't learn coping skills, and I don't remember. Maybe it wasn't on the news as much, but in our area, and I'm sure it's around the world, there's been almost an epidemic of even, teen suicides that have taken place. And I think it also comes down to not coping when you find out that someone killed themselves because, their boyfriend or girlfriend broke up with them, or they got disinvited to the prom, or something you'd scratch your head over. Like, how could you end your life over something? Like, there's a whole world ahead of you. It comes back to, I think, like you talked about, not understanding or being taught properly your own psychology and having a good support system set up. The emotions you talk about, I think, is spot on. When I'm trying to communicate to anybody, whether it's my children or my students, how do you achieve a certain goal? It's not just here's the steps that you have to take, but use what I do for an example. You want to achieve black belt, and I'm speaking to someone that's very close to that, and they have to really push hard for the next year or two to reach this point. It's close your eyes, visualize yourself at the end of that exam, looking down and seeing that black belt tied upon your waist, and looking over at the audience and seeing your family and your friends. What emotions are you feeling? So when you decide that you want to take the day off from running or going to the gym or showing up to class, the feeling that you will achieve that day, I want you to hold on to, because that's what's going to motivate you. And I just kind of, the thought process that you have there is very similar to how I try to approach things as well. Now, when you're going through these different addictions, I without getting too personal, I assume this is what also led to these two divorces as well.
Here, you can get as personal. Like, here's what I've learned. Every death and pain is our unwillingness to admit to other people how imperfect and broken we are, and most of all, to admit to ourselves. It's like I have a quote: when you learn to forgive yourself, they can't hurt you with it anymore. Because think of it, when people find out stuff out about us, we get oh God, we get defensive, right? We don't want you to know that about me. Well, that's that. I have a chapter in my book of how to find your darkness. When you see who you really are, that's freedom. Because now I have nothing to hide. So, we haven't quite gotten into it, but kind of touched on it. I'll prove it to you this way. The greatness movement got started really 7 years ago. I was married in my second marriage, and I woke up in the middle of the night of a dream, and I was shaking, crying, sweating, screaming out, "No, no, no!" And my wife wakes up, and she's like, "Kenny, what's wrong? What's wrong?" And I just kept screaming, "No." And she's like, "What happened?" And I said, well, finally I calmed down enough, and I was like, I just had this dream that I'm on a stage bigger than what was at Martin Luther King, and I'm telling everyone my life story and helping people tell their stories and move past their stuff. And well, that doesn't sound too intimidating. The difficulty was, at that point in my life, I had gone back to drinking after over 20 years of sobriety. My wife and I at the time had an open relationship. We were swingers. My wife, to my knowledge, was the highest paid escort in the country, and I knew all about it. I fully participated. I actually suggested the idea. So I'm sitting there going, how in the hell am I going to tell people how to get through their stuff, or get up there, and who the hell is going to listen to me? Like, I'm a train wreck. There is no way in hell I could ever do any of this. Well, here I am 7 years later, and that's where freedom is. But we as a culture go, yeah, don't go there. Well, in part, the reason we've been taught that is nobody has shown us the pathway out. And that's what I found is, it's different. It goes deep. I love Tony Robbins. I love all the thought leaders out there. They're amazing. But they want to stay away from certain aspects. And it's because of that, we don't have the full map out. You brought up how you deal with your students. Belief. I read several books on belief, wonderful books of people miserable and one day woke up and all of a sudden they believed in themselves. These great transformations. And as I closed each book, I'm like, all they did was tell me great stories. The key to belief, like everyone says, think positive. Well, for the most part, it's a waste of time. Belief is when your feelings and your thoughts line up. And so think of it, if you've taken a test, You've walked in beforehand, you've studied, but you don't feel like, or black belt. I'm sure you've done competitions. You're obviously highly skilled. There are times you've gone into events and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to get killed today. You didn't feel like you could do it. Now you're saying all the positive things, but it's a waste of time until you can learn to shift the way you feel. And then you brought up visualization. Part of the problem with visualization techniques they teach, you mentioned it, is looking down on yourself. Well, that's not how you do it. That's called third person dissociation. That's what rape victims do when they go through trauma. They leave their body. You have to picture yourself. You have to feel yourself in the moment, looking out your eyes. Or anyway, I go through a whole process of how to create what I call feelization versus visualization. So there are all these subtleties. And as I say to a lot of people, if you've been everywhere else, Tony Robbins, all the different great people out there, I'm the next step with the information I have and what I teach. It's the missing link, and that's the void. As I saw these gaps in my own process as I was trying to recover, I kept discovering these things, and that's what I put in the book. That's what the greatness movement is about. There's certain little aspects they just haven't touched on yet. Did I steal a ton from them? Yes, they were part of my process. So I'm not disparaging them. I'm just saying there are aspects that go a bit deeper that they haven't touched on yet.
Well, I think that we rarely invent everything on our own. We're all a product of things we've learned through life, stories we've heard from people, and ultimately, it's one of the greatest compliments is replicating and taking a little bit from everything and everyone in our life to help formulate a little bit who we are, and then you get to put your own take on things. I think it's a perfect time to transition because you led into this dream you had. So I have to kind of hear about, from the moment of that dream and all these addictions, and in your own words, your life is a train wreck.
Yeah.
How do you go from that to deciding it's time to make a change in your life, to getting the education that you needed in order to put the process of writing a book and developing the greatness movement together? So if you could just connect the dots between the train wreck and the dream,
Sure,
to where you got to right now.
I have to add a few previous dots.
Sure, let's do that.
I've always had an ability to walk in a room and feel what's going on in people, even as a kid. I've always had an intuition about life and things. And then even at an early age, I started reading and researching, why am I such a mess? After my first divorce, I started working with a counselor, and over a 10-year period, I probably spent 7 years, and I worked my tail off. And so a lot of the knowledge I got from working with him, and the research I did, reading other books he'd suggest, I ran groups for him. He saw it right away. Two months in working with him, he said, "Kenny, you have a gift. You need to come work for me." And I had just started. And he was like, "Get any piece of paper, but you have a gift to do this." Well, I said back then that I couldn't do it. I was going through the divorce, didn't have money to go back to school. As I see now, I didn't want to give up my sex addiction yet. So I was working on a lot of different things, codependency, love addiction, lots of stuff. But the sex addiction, I wasn't ready to let go of. I get in the second marriage. All of this goes on. I'm still pursuing it, but this is part of the journey. There's no perfection in it. It's progress, not perfection. And sometimes we need to go down to teach us the next piece. And that's what my second marriage was. Had it not been for her and all of that stuff, I wouldn't have figured this out, because as that relationship ended, that's when I became suicidal. And that's when it was during the divorce and all of that I put the final pieces together. And when I spent 3 days holed up in my apartment trying to write a suicide note. You talked about suicide earlier. The reason so many kids are committing suicide is, one, parenting. Parents have this new wave of parenting is to do everything for their kids and rescue them. So these kids have absolutely no coping skills. Anytime something bad goes wrong, their parents fix it for them. So they've never been taught any of this. So when emotions run high, they have no option. They have no skill at all, so that becomes their only resort. But what saved my life was, as I kept trying to write things to my kids to explain the pain I was in, I'm going, No, that's manipulative. That's codependent. That's blame shifting. I knew too much psychology. I couldn't out psychologize myself out of it. And so I realized I couldn't do it. And then I also realized what's been keeping me from what's put me in this pain, and what do I have to do? And I realized there are aspects of my pain I'd never turned towards. I'd never been willing to face. And so I made a commitment that said, I'm done. I'm going to go right at it. And that's when I had intuition about how all of this worked. Then I started studying the brain and body and all these I'm like, oh my God, I'm right. This is exactly what's happening. And so then it wasn't maybe a couple months later, I went back into my office and wrote down, I want to come up with a process that nobody else has ever discovered that'll fundamentally change society. The process is my book. The societal change is the greatness movement. You know, that's how it all sort of developed.
Well, I want to see if we can give people then, I mean, listening to even you talking about, we just discovered also that you have, how many children do you have?
I have 3 children.
As a father,
contemplating
something along those lines, knowing that I have children there is just heartbreaking to hear how low you must have felt at that time in your life, and as anyone would in those moments. And thankfully, in the moment you hit your rock bottom, I believe, and you were able to start climbing your way out of that. And at what point did you decide, though, that it wasn't just about getting your own, for lack of a better word, to get your shit together, and then you wanted to take it a step further, and you wanted to, do something to share your experiences to help others? Why go to the next step and not just focus on you?
Well, that's one of the misnomers that people don't realize. Honestly, we never do anything for anybody else, ever. It's not possible. Think about it. I gave a speech last night at a church group, or a church at a church. And, spirituality is all about doing things for others. But think of it. And I asked the question, I went around the whole congregation, not everybody, but I said, why do you like to do stuff for other people? Every single person started their response with, I. Well, I love to see the look on their faces. I love to help out. And I said, you see, we don't ever do it for others. We do it for ourselves first. Now, what gets us in trouble is what most people try and do is they try and do things for others with an expectation back. And so you hear this in marriages. I've cooked for you, I clean for you, and you won't take out the trash, right? Or the husband says, look, I work 80 hours a week, I provide you this nice house, and you want to have sex with me. Well, that tells me you're doing those things to get something in return. See, we've all been raised to do things for others, but we've all been raised to do it in a manipulative way. So all the work I do, what I'm doing, every single client that comes to me, they're just a mirror showing me my own imperfections. I'm helping me. Now, like I'll say this, Mother Teresa never did a single thing for anybody. Mother Teresa had an emotional addiction to liking the feeling of when she did these things and their responses. Now, the ancillary benefit is billions, millions benefited, but she did it for her first. And that's what we all do. And that's healthy. That's incredibly healthy. And so I'm still working on me. Now, the ancillary benefit is because I've learned some things and I now have some wisdom. Yes, many other people benefit, and that's wonderful. But the bottom line is I have to constantly be working on me. It never ends. And so when somebody brings stuff up, all I go is, oh yeah, that's me. Yeah, that's still me. And then I can impart how I worked with that. But like clients will do this. They try and turn me into the hero. But think about it. They come to see me for an hour a week. How many hours in a week? 150, 60, something like that. The rest of the week, they make a choice whether they do any work or not. I don't. They make a choice if they're going to show up and pay me. Like I'm not doing anything. They're doing all the work, but that's part of how we've been conditioned is success and everything's an outward process. I get it from outside of me. Well, they're doing it again. They're trying to place it on me when no, it's in you, but no one's shown you how to walk in you and
Right.
accept your own greatness. You're the one doing the work. And that's part of the coaching process is, wait a minute. Yes, I have some information that can be a help, but only if you want it. Don't rob yourself. You've robbed yourself your whole life. Society has robbed you your whole life. You better damn well take hold of this. You're choosing this. That's what will get you out. That's part of the process that gets you out.
Man, I love the complete honesty of you talking about the need to continue to do what you do to consistently see yourself and other people. And it's almost like the consistent exercise of your mind and your emotions by helping other people. Maybe through this process, you're also continually giving yourself the continual message over and over again. Because I would imagine that you never fully dismiss all of these addictive tendencies that you have, but you've been able to take some of this energy and direct it, even though it's still for you, admittedly, it's producing much more positive results than some of your past habits have done, of course.
Well, I've reconciled. There are certain things that I'm okay with now. Like, see, when you grow up with none of this information, we all tend to live in extremes. You know, either a black and white, yes or no, and alcoholism is an extreme. Well, I know this. As much as I'd like to have one drink, I just can't. Like, I look at people, I'm like, how'd you do that? Like, I just will not stop, you know? Well, I don't like the hangovers. It's too much pain. I don't want to live in that pain anymore, so I don't choose it. So I've reconciled, but I don't beat myself up for it. See, let me give you this example. This will show it the best. And I tell this story in my book. I call it The Day I Saw My Darkness. I went to meet someone for coffee. And within 3 questions, she had gutted her life story. And I remember that night I went for a walk and I was patting myself on the back of, God, life's great. Things are going well with what I'm trying to do. And I'm really good at what I do. Isn't it amazing? People open up to me. And I always ask myself questions. As I'm walking, I ask myself, so what do you like about that? Well, I heard myself go, I like the power. And I started to slow down. I went, wait a minute. What do you like? And I heard myself say, power. I like the power. And I buckled. This all happened like that, but it takes a couple minutes to explain. Like, I broke over and I realized, oh my God, you ever remember the movie Predator?
Yes.
Right? And the alien survived by sucking all the life out of a human and leaving a skeleton. I realized in that moment that all my life I had used my gift of reading people, knowing people. I had used it to suck the life out of them emotionally. I didn't help her. What I did was extract from her. And in that moment, I went, oh my God, my gift is my curse. Well, immediately, once I saw the true nature of how narcissistic that is, how manipulative it is, how awful it is, the next thing I got completely overwhelmed was pure peace. I went, oh my God, now I know. All my life, whether I could have friends or all these struggles, I realized it was because of that. So for the first time in my life, I found the peace in me that was keeping me from me. That's when I got free. So that's why I can be so open with how imperfect I am, because I saw it and I accepted it. And that's what people that are in pain or struggling in their life, that's what they're missing. They haven't found that darkest part of themselves and reconciled it. And even if you're spiritual, I don't care if you're not, think of the Bible. It's a spiritual process. If you believe in God, what do they say about God? He or she's perfect. Everything they create is perfect. Well, who created the devil? God, right? So what's the devil? It's God's darkness, right? And what's the reconciliation? When they come back together. That's what we all need. Until we see that part of ourselves, we aren't free. Because then I have to hide from you my imperfections.
Right. To accept all the pieces of who we are and not just want to promote all the things that we think society wants to hear about us. Even though we don't want to share this deep down, we know that we all have these imperfections within ourselves and our own problems and our own struggles. But we feel as though often if we share them that we're appearing to be weaker, and not as, involved with life as someone else may be and may not have as enough of a grip on the world like we should have. I love that approach of really of reconciling every part of yourself, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. Now you mentioned, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just want to say something. Here's a perfect example of how that shows up in real life. On my podcast 2 weeks ago, a woman watched it a couple of days later, and she put, "You're an awful man." That was her comment. And when I read that, I got a rush of shame and embarrassment. But I now know the tools. I went, "Why do you feel that way?" "Oh, well, look at what I've just told you. I've done a lot of awful things in my life. I have been an awful man. The reason I got that reaction and wanted to defend it is because there's truth in it." Well, now, but because I've accepted that, I went, okay, so she's telling the truth. So is that a problem? No. What that means is she saw all of me. Like, that's a gift. Like, where's the problem here? Now, the next step is, when you learn about denial, how denial works, whenever we judge, blame, or criticize, what we're judging, blaming, and criticizing is us. It's a mirror. And so what that told me is what I talked about in my podcast triggered her. She feels awful inside. Mm-hmm. And that's what she really exposed, because I've reconciled that I can be. But see, that's the other thing. I've done the work. I know I'm not a sociopath. I know I'm not a psychopath. I have empathy. And so while I have moments where I'm awful, I'm not an awful person. I'm imperfect. So I can reconcile it in myself. I can see that, wait a minute, this is her pain. And so my response to her was, "I really appreciate your vulnerability. That's really powerful. Thank you for sharing." Because it was. She told me who she was.
Right.
She also reminded me of who I am. Where's the problem here? Wouldn't that be great in politics if both sides could see it that way? Think of how things would change.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's very often when people criticize others, they often are choosing to attack what they don't like about themselves. And that's kind of what you brought up in that example in your story, for sure. The question I wanted to ask you is that you talked about, Tony Robbins, all these other, life coaches that are out there, and that there's great information, but they don't take it to the next step. So when people are coming to you for consultation and they want to, get your book, and they're thinking about, well, what am I going to get from this that's different from others? How are you best able to explain why your approach, or why you take it a little bit further, is the right way, the important way, or how that's going to benefit them? So what makes you different as a life coach, or what lessons are they going to get from following you a little more?
Great question. One of the first examples, and like I said, I've stolen a ton from Tony. He's wonderful. But what does he say the most important thing is? Out of anything, not your business plan, not your goals, not any of that. He says you need to change your state. Well, what's a state? It's your emotions, but he doesn't want to use that word because we don't like that word. So he's created a word that is neutral, that doesn't offend people. All right. And then he doesn't take it into showing you how to shift your emotions. Here's a perfect example: fear. What are we all told about fear? Well, just push through it. Well, that doesn't work. Here's one of the ways I do. I break down fear. Fear is always one of three things. You're either fearing rejection, you're fearing being inadequate. In other words, you don't think you have the skills, tools, or knowledge, or you feel powerless. Now, I'm not going to get into breaking it. It'd take too long. It's all in the book. So if you fear rejection, you have self-esteem issues. You're looking outside of yourself. So I give you the whole process: one, to diagnose it, and then recover from it. Inadequacy, skills, tools, or knowledge. That's simple. If you're starting a new job, geez, how does this computer work? Well, go become an expert in it. That's the easiest fear to overcome. Powerlessness is different. That goes back to trauma. That goes back to the inability to say no. Like that one would take, we could do a whole show just on that one. That's usually it's the people's primary fears are rejection and powerlessness, but I've never seen anyone describe the powerlessness aspect that I go through. And nobody's delineated it like I have. So like my clients know whenever fear, or here's another thing, stress is the buzzword out there, right? Everyone wants to fix your stress. Okay. Well, the clinical definition of stress is fear, white hot fear. But again, we don't want to talk about that, because what's it say if I tell you I'm stressed? I must be working 200 hours a week. I take my wife out on 10 glorious dates. I volunteer 30 hours a week with my kids' school. Like I'm superhuman. I'm better than you. No, the truth is you are scared to death. So we create a falsely empowering term. So people that address stress aren't even addressing the core issue. It's fear. But if I tell you I'm afraid, what does it mean? You're going to see my dark side, how inadequate and imperfect I am. So that's what I mean is I get to the root. So if you're stressed out over anything, you need to be dealing with fear. All the stress things that they tell you to deal with aren't the root causes. They're Band-Aids over a gaping open heart surgery. And so those are just a couple of the subtle ways. The biggest aspect, Byron Katie she does what she calls the work, but it's actually denial. What my book shows you is how denial works. And then the other aspect is Brene Brown is gifted at shame, but she doesn't show, I take it to the next step of any part of your life that's not working, you're re-victimizing yourself. And I can show you just like that, whatever problem is in your life, you've set it up and I show you exactly how you did it and how to get out of it. And I haven't seen anybody show that. So those are just a couple of examples, and there's more to it.
Sure.
It just goes much deeper.
So there's two follow-up questions. First one is that you mentioned that you could sit down with someone and 2 to 3 or so questions, you could kind of find out what the root of their issues are. Is this something you go through in your book and teach people on how they could ask themselves these questions? And are you able to give us an example of at least what one of those or 2 of those questions are so that we could start thinking about ourselves, that first step?
Yeah. It's a multi-layered process. That's why the name of the book is Journey.
Sure.
Most people in this business want to sell you a 2-3 day adrenaline weekend event. They're wonderful. Go, you're going to feel great. You're going to learn a few things, but you can't change. Change is a much longer process, but we don't want to hear that. That's another aspect, because I won't lie to people. Look, it's a lifelong journey, and you're not going to get it going to a weekend event by any of these people. Like, that's why I don't do them. The greatness movement is a 12-month process. I refuse to do the adrenaline weekend change events because they don't work. They will give you a lift, but they won't give you the process. It's too much information too soon. So one of you asked, what are some questions you can ask yourself? Well, the first thing you can start with is, how much does it cost me? Because most of us, our fear is, what will it look like if I change? And so we don't do it. But ask yourself this, project yourself 1 month, 6 months, 1 year, 5 years from where you are in your life now. If you continue to not look at the stuff in my book or the things I talk about, looking back, say, even a year from now, are you okay if you don't do anything? If you can live with that, fine. Don't go near any of my stuff or anybody's. But if you honestly can look at that and go, yeah, if I don't touch any of this, can I live with that? Most of us would say no. And then what feeling comes up? Usually it's a heavy dread, a massive fear. Now ask yourself, when was the first time you felt that feeling? Going to tie into something you went in childhood. I mean, like, the layers to this,
sure,
you just keep chipping away. But here, the basic process is this. Like, I teach a lot of self-esteem stuff. The secret to all of this is, as your self-esteem rises, your denial drops. As your denial drops, you'll see more of who you really are and what you need to work on. But most people won't even start the self-esteem process because they're getting so much from being the victim and having their life be terrible and blaming it on everybody else. So it would, to give you an answer to that, it would depend on the person I'm sitting across from and exactly how they're operating the cycle in their life. Because I could give a couple questions to this person and that would trigger them, but it wouldn't be to this person because they're at this part of the cycle or operating in a different way. So it's a little nuanced as to how to give you it's not a broad answer.
Sure, everyone's different. Obviously, everyone's an individual. And when you were just speaking there, it made me realize of a lot of people I look at in life that seem to always attract drama to themselves. Even when things are going good, they try to find something to complain about. And I guess it goes back to that desire of at least getting the attention, even though it may be negative, that they could be a victim, that at least the eyes are on them, the attention's on them, and they're hoping that they'll get like maybe a little rush or a buzz, like a drug or a drink for a moment where someone's paying attention to me and they're caring about me, listening to my problems, but doesn't necessarily solve it. So although it's individual, I would imagine that there are some basics that you're going to take some people through, a lot of which starts with looking within. And I think you talked about being truly honest and trying to discover what their fears are and what their goals are, and trying to make sure that people ultimately will realize that no matter how bad it is. I would imagine this is something that you probably run into, that they may hear your story and you may have the litany of challenges you faced. Do you often get the question of like, well, you can't help me. What are you going to do for me? Because you don't understand what I've been through. What I've been through is different, more intense. Like a lot of people often think what they go through, what their problems are, completely outweigh what anyone else could possibly be going through. So maybe you can't answer that specifically, but how do you break that barrier down just to get someone to open their mind enough to just listen that there is some hope for them?
Yeah. And conversely, others go, well, mine isn't that bad. Both of those are denial.
Okay.
It's a defense mechanism to hold on to. See, I talk in my book about how the brain and body works. The reason we don't change, the reason we get stuck on this worst day cycle is also because of how I don't want to get into the science of it. I don't want to bore people, but you're wearing, it looks like a blue t-shirt. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So what happened when you went into your closet this morning? Literally, what happened to you was the cells of your body sent a signal to your brain. You have an emotional addiction to that color in that shirt. And when you walked in, that got triggered. Every choice we ever make is an emotional addiction. What the plant in the back of your office there, the way you decorate, all of it.
Right.
It becomes a neural pathway. Think of it this way. The reason people get stuck on this rut, I use this analogy in my book of, you ever go sledding after it just snows, 3 feet of powder, right? You go down the hill, it's great. You walk back up and you go down that same path. Well, you do that 3 or 4 times. Well, let's say in the middle of it, you want to try and go a different direction. Well, the walls now are built so high, you can't. You're stuck. So what my book does is, one, show you, okay, this is the neural pathway you're stuck on. Now, as you walk back up that hill, you're going to learn, why am I stepping this way? What's causing me? What am I feeling and thinking as I come up to the top of this hill? Now that I know what this cycle is, when I get to the top of the hill, instead of choosing the sled, this pre-worn path, here's how I take a step to the left and carve a new one. So to get back to your question of somebody who's been in too much pain, my pain's worse than yours. Okay, maybe it is. Good for you. It sounds like it works for you. It doesn't say, if you believe it's that bad, then that tells me you want to keep it. Well, I can't help you. And conversely, oh, mine isn't that bad. See, everyone tries to grade trauma like it's better or worse. The bottom line is, if all you ever have been through is being yelled at by your parents for, say, spilling milk, like that was it. Well, to you, that is like being in a war zone for somebody else. There's no difference. They still have an effect on you. And so I don't grade trauma, but I know when somebody's entrenched in their trauma and doesn't want to let go of it, then my response to them is go. Whatever you're doing, do more of it. Accelerate it. If you're cheating, if you're drinking, if you're popping pills, smoking pot, overworking, I don't care what it is, do more of it. Please. Go inflict so much pain on yourself that eventually you run out. Because that's what happened to me. I ran out. And that's until we address the cycle that I talk about as a society, like we don't have to live this way. What motivates us as a society now is pain. I teach how it doesn't have to be that way, but to do that, we'd have to take on the method that I teach. So, but right now, that's the only way. Please go hurt yourself more.
Wow. I'm intrigued just in the conversation to pick up a copy of your book and give it a read. It sounds like there's so much insightful information and discovery that'll be found within there. How does the greatness movement stand away or work in unison with your book? What can you describe what that's about a little bit more?
Well, the what we go through in the the course of the greatness movement are the chapters of the book. We walk you through the worst day cycle and the recovery process and the self-reflection and self-discovery that we all need. If we want to me, walk on our greatness, which is different than success. Success is an outward process. It's about accumulating things and status. Greatness is within. It's overcoming our imperfections and those demons and those blocks to who we're authentically meant to be. And that's what I want to preach. I wish I'd have named my book Your Journey to Greatness, not Success. I picked the wrong word even for myself, but a learning tool for me. So what differentiates us is, one, like I said, we don't do the adrenaline events. We meet once a month. There's a workbook where I guide, I set up a private Facebook group. It's small groups, 8 to 10 people. We need intimacy. Think of it. I know there are a lot of companies or people that put on big events of 200, 500, 10,000 people, and they want people to share their life story. Well, people will tell some, but they aren't going to tell you what I just told you about my wife and being an escort. They're not going to let that out. Well, until you let that out, you're not going to get there. Now, it's not that people have to divulge that in the group, but that's part of the process of their homework. Well, there's safety in a smaller group. Plus, there's no massive upsell of buy this, after those events, then you get, cornered into buying the next thing. We don't touch any of that. So the book is, I break it down even to a much deeper level than I went in the book. And the recovery steps that are in the book, it's all the questions I asked myself. The whole process I put myself through to go through this process. So it's much more expansive than even I can put in the book.
Wow. So the book lays down the foundation and the company that kind of you have here with this greatness movement is guiding people through each section of the book and creating an interactive experience with you in small groups to help take the lessons in the book a little bit further. And I would imagine your podcast just is the trifecta there of tying that all together and continuing to come up with consistent and new content all the time. Through your process of all these conversations and meetings you're having with people, is it giving you ideas for the next book, or is this right now the main goal that you have is to continue what you've been doing thus far?
I know there's another book in me, but in moments I'm like, oh, that's it. I'm not overcome by it yet. I know, probably there'd be a lot of things I would add to or redo in my current book. I would expand on because little subtle pieces I would have liked to explain better, because one of my frustrations in the self-help book is they use catchphrases, but they don't describe them. And I made a commitment not to do that. But I realized in the editing process, it's this back and forth, and then you go away for a couple of weeks and it's done. Now it's copy editing and making sure everything's aligned right. Well, it's like painting, a wall. You're like, oh, it's perfect. You go on vacation, you come back and go, how did I miss that?
Right.
And so there are little gaps like that where I'm like, oh my God, I did just what they do. I threw a catchphrase out. I didn't describe it and go deeper. So there are little gaps like that I'd like to clean up. But I'm playing with some certain ideas, but nothing's overwhelmed me as far as this is the next real kind of teaching point. I know there's so much in my book. And like most people, my book is literally a book you need to read 2 to 4 times a year over many years for your brain and body to fully assimilate everything. It's easy to read, but it's so in depth and so challenging. And the feedback I get is, people tend after the second or third chapter just go, oh my God, they stop and are contemplating everything. And I'm like, no. Your first time through, just go all the way to the end, because I need parts of your brain to calm down so you can see parts of yourself. I know my book is packed with so much stuff that makes you challenge who you are, that it could be expanded on more. And even that would be a lot for a lot of people.
Okay. So and again, it's hard to be generic because there's so many individuals out there, but I like to always, towards the end, ask the guest if whether it's a phrase, a story, a quote, or whatever it may be that you would like to leave the audience with, enough of which I think you've gone through some really great detail of why they should be picking up a copy of your book, and we'll go over where they could find that in a moment. But overall, if you had whatever that message would be and how you'd like to phrase that, what is it that you'd want to say to the audience?
Well, the one quote I always have is, when you learn to forgive yourself, they can't hurt you with it anymore. That's true peace. And the other aspect is, I know how scary it is. Like, I was suicidal. I know how scary it is to look at this stuff. It's frightening. And we find ways to put it off. But here's the thing I learned was, when I sat there contemplating it, and my picture of what it would look like if I dealt with it, that looked like pure pain and pure hell. And, that's what we all go through. I hear everyone describe it. Oh, I don't want to go there. God, that seems too big. Well, what I realized once I started the process is, oh my God, this is just discomfort. Pain is how I've been living my life every day. That's true pain. But you don't see that until you make the move. And the other thing I'd leave with is, I have yet to see a person on this planet who has found true freedom, success, peace. And when I say success, it means being comfortable within yourself, regardless if you have all the things and stuff you want in life. I've yet to see a person find it who has not gone and discovered and worked through all the trauma they've been through. If you're not working through it, you have made a choice to limit who you are as a person. I won't judge you for it, but at least own that. And that may be okay for you. Like, I'm not saying everyone has to do it, but if you don't like where you are, if you think you're capable of more, which is where I was like, all I ever do is destroy myself. I'm sick of it. If you're at that place, then my book, The Greatness Movement, will definitely take you on that path.
Wow. You're from someone who's just met you and had a chance to interview you briefly and share part of your story, to know where you've come from and how you've transitioned to where you are now, and how you've, a lot of people read books and go to seminars, but how you've been able to tie that into your personality and be able to express it so passionately and put all these ideas and thoughts together. What comes across to me is an absolute sincerity. And it's not just this phony used car salesman, like you said, buy my next thing. So from my standpoint, for someone who's been teaching for so long and have dealt with lots of people, if you haven't heard it a lot, I'm very proud of you for having gone through this and taken it down this very positive path to not only continually help yourself and keep yourself on track, but to get that message out there. And I believe that even though you've come a long way in these last few years starting this movement, it sounds to me like you're just at the beginning of it. And I look forward to see what comes next and follow you a little further. So if people do want to follow you a little bit online, if they want to get a copy of your book, if you can go through this briefly.
Sure.
Again, I'll include this in the show notes, but I'll give you an opportunity to share a little bit of how people could find more information about you and get a copy of your book.
Well, I first of all, I really appreciate the compliment. And this is another gift that comes from doing this work. When I was younger playing pro sports, and we all do this, whether it's our career, whatever it is we look for, we want compliments like that, right? We're all looking for it. We want our spouse or somebody to say how great we are or how authentic or whatever. When I got to the other side of this journey, the beauty for me, like the first time, I'll never forget, I was working with a pro golfer and we're in this meeting and he stood up and he said, I've worked with the top golf psychologists, all the guys' names. If you're into golf, you know who they are. And he said, and I learned more from Kenny in 30 minutes than I ever learned from any of them. And what hit me was inside, I went, I know. Now, it wasn't an egotistical thing. What gave me chills was that I actually knew it. Like, I didn't need you to say it. So like, my point is we all want compliments, but the beauty of this journey is you just gave me a wonderful compliment. I appreciate it. But I know I'm sincere. Like, that's the gift. I know it. That's much more powerful than anything somebody could say to me. So
Right.
that's the real piece that I found.
Well, being able to believe in yourself, because if you didn't believe it was true, that compliment would roll right off of your shoulders and it would not make an impact. In the same way, an insult might be absorbed by someone when they hear negativity from bad parents or friends or just, some evil people in the world. Sometimes they hear criticisms of themselves and they believe it. But I think the opposite holds true as well on that end, that if you truly know who you are and believe who you are, that won't impact you either. Like I say to students all the time when we're talking about bullying, if someone walked in the room right now and said, hey, Master Alders, you don't know anything about martial arts. You know nothing. You're a phony. It wouldn't impact me at all because I know it to not be true. You know what I mean? I have the life experience and the time in to know it not to be true. And so whether it's knowing something positive that you have, a good quality you possess, or being able to reflect on some of the darkness that you've mentioned, when I think you truly encompass it all and absorb the fact that this is all of who you are and you accept you for who you are, the compliments and the negativity doesn't necessarily have as severe as an impact, where I think you could just have graciously, as you did in that moment, smile and say thank you. But it's not like my compliment is going to change the rest of your day right now, or have your ego fluffed up, because deep down, ultimately, it's meaningless unless you actually believe it yourself.
And just like what you said to me means just as much to me as that woman who's calling me awful. Both are true. Both are true. That
right.
is, I can hear both and have the exact conclusion to both. And that to me is wonderful. But anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to explain that. So as far as if people are interested, if they've heard something they like, you can go to the Greatness Movement, www.thegreatnessmovement.com. From there, you can read more about the groups and events. We have a whole series next year we're putting on here in Arizona that we're developing, but you can join the email list, so keep abreast when I'm speaking. There are people, like I was in Denver just a while back, some people that follow my podcast, like, will you come out here? And they just got a bunch of people to fly me out there and speak. So stuff like that happens. So you can follow things there. If you're looking for free advice, please go to my YouTube channel and subscribe. Just look up Kenny Weiss. I think I have over 160 videos on different topics, from relationships to career to you name it, plus all my old podcast shows. If you like podcasts like this, like Eric's, you can follow me on Spreaker, iTunes, iHeart, Spotify, all of that, or send me a friend request on Facebook. I do it live every Sunday night, 7 p.m. Arizona time. And so you can watch me live if you want to, or listen live as well, or you can watch the tape show. I always download it onto my YouTube channel. So there are some options. As far as my book, Your Journey to Success, you can buy that on the website, thegreatnessmovement.com, or go to Amazon. It's in paperback, Audible, and also Kindle, all the different formats. And I did the reading. I didn't hire anyone because I tell so many stories. It was like, these are my stories. I have to tell it. I don't want to pay somebody to do that. So those are, several avenues. If people, Instagram, look for the Greatness Movement, so they're just Google the Greatness Movement, and that splinters to everything. Make it simple. Google the Greatness Movement. Everything will come up. You pick and choose what works for you. And if I can help in any way, please send me a message, or if there's topics you want videos or things on, whatever I can do to help, please let me know.
That's awesome. And I love that you said that you have an Audible version, because I do have an Audible account.
Yes.
I travel a lot, so I don't have especially with twins at home, don't always have the peace to sit down and read a book. So being able to listen in the car or at the gym is usually my choice in getting some knowledge in. So I will be downloading a copy of that as soon as the podcast is over. I look forward to learning about it as well. Kenny, thank you so much for being so open and honest, and for being you. Again, I'm not trying to say this to fluff you up. I know you believe it all. But
Yeah.
I also have a true appreciation for people in this world, and for people that are trying to contribute and not just take. Obviously, there's both that's required in the world, but it's a pleasure to meet souls from all over the world that our paths may have never crossed if it wasn't for a venue like podcasting, and for a chance to meet you and learn a little bit about you, and to grab a copy of your book and have it impact my life. It'll be something it'll be able to stick with me, and I'll be able to pass on to my students and to my friends. So I'm sure you're super busy, so for you taking the time out to come on the podcast, I'm truly appreciative and grateful. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And the other side of this is, this is how judgment works. And I end my show this way: is whenever we judge, blame, and criticize somebody, we're always talking about ourselves, but the opposite is true, because we can't see anything in anybody that's not operating in us. So when we see something in somebody else, like you just described authenticity, you can't see that if it's not in you. So the opposite, in the positive, it's true too, is so your compliment of me also tells me about you just as much. And your willingness to have me on says you're authentic and you want to do, it's not just about me, it speaks to you as well. So thank you for that. And because a lot of people don't want to hear that go where I go. And so again, it says just as much about you. So thank you for that.
I appreciate that, sir. Well, I want to definitely just one more time remind everyone to, if they miss it, to listen again for all the links, to take a look at the show notes as well, to follow Kenny's The Greatness Movement online, to get a copy of the book, and to please continue listening to episodes of Life's Black Belts, and check out the Greatness Movement podcast as well. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening. And one more time, thank you to today's Life's Black Belt, Mr. Kenny Weiss. Thanks again, sir. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.